was hard to tell if Drake was trying to frame Iceman as a redemption arc or a victory lap. But one thing's for sure, the success of this project for Drake's legacy wasn't optional, it was necessary. Drake got drowned and for the last 2 years has been treading water in what many consider to be the dot era. Kendrick beat Drake at his own game in multiple ways, going back to back on him in their battle, turning a diss song into a hit song, and using the next year and a half to show Drake that he can play Drake's numbers game arguably better than Drake can. Highest grossing hip-hop tours, stadium shows, #1 hits, best-selling rap album of the year in 2024 and 25 with GNX. Drake had to come back and show the world that this couldn't be the dot era, it couldn't be a new era because nothing about Drake has changed. And we know that the #1 element to Drake's legacy is the numbers. So that's the first thing fans are going to look at to see if Drake really suffered a fall off or if his Kendrick battle and his legal battles made him stronger than ever before. So that's the first thing we'll take a look at in this video. Does Iceman numbers still leave Drake at the top of the big three? Now wouldn't this be the most beautiful case of poetic justice? After over a full year, the wait for a rap song to be #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 finally comes to an end as Drake's song Janice STFU hits the #1 on the Billboard charts. It's the first rap song to hit #1 since Kendrick Lamar and SZA's Luther. And if you dig deeper into the numbers, you can see that Kendrick Lamar and Drake have basically been playing ping pong with each other from a numbers perspective ever since the battle ended. Drake had the highest grossing hip-hop tour in history with his 2023 It's All a Blur tour generating $320 million, but Kendrick came in and smashed that record with his and SZA's Grand National tour generating almost $370 million in 2025. Back in 2024, Kendrick's Not Like Us broke the record for the song with the most amount of streams on Spotify in a single day, a record that was previously held by a Drake song, and then now in 2026, Drake took that record back from Kendrick Lamar with the intro off of Iceman now holding the record for most amount of streams in a single day for a rap song off of Spotify. But these monstrous numbers and record-breaking streaks that both artists have experienced gets more insane. Right after Kendrick's Super Bowl performance in 2025, his album started getting a massive spike in streams, which led him to become the first rapper to ever chart 3 individual albums all at once in the top 10 of the Billboard 200 chart. GNX was at #1 that week, then Damn at #9, and Good Kid Mad City at #10. But a year after that, Drake joins Kendrick Lamar of achieving this same accomplishment when he dropped Iceman and those other 2 albums in the same night. All of them obviously hit the top 10 of the Billboard charts, meaning that Drake and Kendrick are now the only 2 artists to ever have 3 albums chart in the top 10 at the same time. But with Iceman going #1, Drake also broke an important record that a very important rapper used to hold. With Iceman going #1, Drake now has 15 #1 albums throughout his career, and he has officially just beat Jay-Z's record of the rapper with the most amount of #1 albums in history. Him and Jay-Z were tied for 14 #1 albums, now he's got 15. But it's stuff like this that you gotta remember. It's statistics like this that are gonna lead to very important questions later in this video. And it leads us to the question, did Drake beat the industry or did he just figure out how to play the industry games at a more preposterous level than everyone else? And if that's the case, does all these records that he's beating have any real merit? Like, yeah, he just beat Jay-Z's record, but the last Jay-Z album that dropped was almost 10 years ago, 444. Magna Carta was before 444. The gap between Magna Carta and 444 was 4 years. Then there was Blueprint 3. The gap between Magna Carta and Blueprint 3, that was also 4 years. Don't forget, Jay-Z was retired for 30% of the 2000s decade. Meanwhile, look at Drake. Since the year that 444 has released, Drake has put out 14 different projects. So yeah, he's now the rapper with the most amount of #1 albums on the Billboard charts, right? He's got 15 of them. But does that achievement mean nearly as much when you step back and realize that Drake has put out 14 albums in the last 9 years? Like, the quality that Drake sacrificed on these projects to keep up that quick release schedule could have been used to construct projects that were actually more impactful and built to last. And that's evident when you look at the next record that Drake just broke. Drake becomes the first rapper in history to chart 12 different albums on the Billboard in the same week. Now, I'm not here to hate, alright? This is like beyond impressive. And as much as people want to say Drake doesn't have a classic album, and as much as I was just saying that a lot of his later output, especially in the 2020s decade, sacrificed quality for just sheer volume, you can see that's pretty apparent in the actual placements of the albums that Drake has on the charts this week. Aside from the 3 brand new albums that he just released, Iceman, Habibti, and Maid of Honor, the next album that is charting the highest on the Billboard charts from Drake right now is Take Care, which was released 15 years ago in 2011, and Views, which was released 10 years ago. So it shows you that, yeah, compared to some of the other biggest rappers in the game, in history, Kanye West, Eminem, Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, fans are visiting these old Drake albums, sometimes even more than these other rappers I just mentioned. But also at the same time, out of Drake's entire catalog of like thousands of songs, people are still revisiting his oldest music more than the new stuff. And it's statistics like this that prove my point, right? These 2 new albums that Drake just released last week, Habibti and Maid of Honor, right now if you look at those charts, yeah, they might have just hit number 2 and 3 on the Billboard, but right now, a week later, are people still listening to the music? Well, just a week later, only 6 of those 25 songs from both combined albums are still in the top 100 of the Apple Music chart. And if you look at Spotify, 0 of the 25 songs on those 2 albums are still on the charts. So breaking all these records are impressive, but like I said, is this Drake beating the industry, dropping music that's so undeniable that it'll just destroy the charts for eternity? Or did he just figure out how to play the industry? Because the way the charts changed after streaming took over, it made it so that all you need is a lot of attention on your music in the first couple days of its release to actually make an impact on the charts. That's why I was saying before, yeah, Drake may have accomplished something impressive, dropping so much music to the point where he starts breaking all of these charting records, but are all these albums, all this music, gonna have the longevity of the music that came from the artist whose charting records Drake just broke? We know that the charts aren't everything, but Drake is the numbers guy. This was his redemption arc. We gotta look at these records he broke to put it into perspective when asking the question, has Drake lost it? Has he lost a step? And I do think it's, records like this that highlight not just the sheer volume of music, the dominance that Drake has had on the charts, but it also showcases the dedication that Drake has had towards achieving chart-related goals like this. 402 Drake songs have made it onto the Billboard charts. That is absolutely insane. But it's also very interesting to factor in who's on this list within hip hop and who's not, right? I mean, also keep in mind from a bigger perspective, Rihanna's not on this list, Beyonce's not on this list, Lady Gaga's not on this list, Madonna's not on this list, Michael Jackson, we'll get to him later. But on the hip hop side of things, Kendrick Lamar's not on this list, Tupac's not on this list, Jay-Z's not on here, DMX, who had one of the most commercially successful years in hip-hop history in 1998, not on here. Then you got rappers like Lil Baby, Lil Uzi, even Future, who have had more Billboard charting songs than someone like Eminem. I guarantee you Future, Lil Baby, and Lil Uzi doing a show all together could not sell more tickets than a single Eminem show. So when I go back to ask you guys the question, did Drake beat the industry or did he just figure out how to play the industry? This is partially what I'm talking about. On one end, he deserves tons of praise and credit for being able to have this relentless work ethic where he's dropped, again, 14 albums in 9 years. And I'm not saying for a second that amidst those 14 projects, there's not some good music, right? But at the same time, with the way that streaming changed the way to make it onto the Billboard chart, has Drake along the way maybe immensely sacrificed quality over quantity to cater to these new Billboard rules? I think we get the answer to that question when we dig further into even more records that Drake has broken. This has got to be by far the most impressive record Drake broke, and one of the most impressive records in music history from a numbers perspective. Drake just broke Michael Jackson's record for being the male solo artist with the most amount of #1 Billboard hits in history. And we know that Drake has a lot of impactful, massive hits, right? Like, that's no question. Headlines, Hell Yeah Effin' Right, Marvin's Room, Best I Ever Had. But when it's all said and done, are we really going to be looking at Drake's catalog at the same level as someone like Michael Jackson's, if you're talking not even impact, not even quality, but just recognition amongst the American population, right? Because the Billboard #1 hits, these are all American hits. Let's take a look side to side at all the #1 hits that Michael Jackson had. He had 13. Meanwhile, all the #1 hits that Drake had. He now beat Michael Jackson's record and has 14. So with Michael Jackson, I mean, you could be 5 years old, you could be 95 years old. Odds are you're going to know, or you'll at least have heard over half the songs on this list, no matter what. Don't Stop Till You Get Enough, Billie Jean, Beat It, Bad, The Way You Make Me Feel, Man in the Mirror, Dirty Diana. Like, these records transcend music, right? You could have heard these in a movie, at a wedding. And the crazy part is we're not talking about some of the other iconic songs that Michael Jackson has, right? Thriller, We Are the World, all the Jackson 5 stuff. The irony is that Michael Jackson fans now want to reclaim this achievement since Thriller never actually hit #1. They want to make it go #1 this coming Halloween. But anyways, as for Drake, so Drake now has the record of the most #1 hits, 14 of them, right? And I would argue that on a much smaller scale to a Beat It or a Billie Jean, Drake does have a couple songs on this list that anyone from a 5-year-old to a 95-year-old has probably heard at one point or another. Work, One Dance, God's Plan, maybe Nice for What, maybe In My Feelings, even some tracks that didn't hit #1 in Drake's catalog are, unanimous, globally renowned hits, right? Like Hotline Bling, Hold On, You're Going Home, but
I study for a living.
Here's where it gets interesting. Remember how I said that ever since 2017, Drake has dropped 14 different projects. This was really the time when you started seeing Drake shift the gears and going full, quantity over quality. This is also the time when he got most of his #1 hits. More than half of them came after the 2020s decade, which on paper is impressive, but when you dig deeper into what these songs are, you gotta ask yourself, are these even deserving of being #1 hits, or did the change of charting rules when streaming came into play just make it super easy for Drake to play this game where he's constantly churning out #1 hit after #1 hit, simply because there's a high interest in that first week when these records first release? What do I mean by that? Well, it used to be that if you wanted your song to chart on the Billboard, people had to actually purchase the individual single off of iTunes, or the individual song. If they purchased the full album off of iTunes, that did not count as a sale of any individual song. And of course, in Michael Jackson's era, there was no iTunes. So you literally had to go out to the record shop and buy a physical copy of the individual single for it to count as a sale for the Billboard charts. And then of course radio came into play as well. But with streaming, it's like a YouTube video, right? Anytime an artist drops a new album, think of that like a YouTuber dropping a new video. The same way you might watch that video, you also might hit play on this brand new album. So when you got hundreds of millions of people tuning in, to listen to this brand new Drake album, and when Drake releases 14 brand new albums in 9 years, you get many opportunities for the interest to be super high for one quick week for a song to shoot up to the top of the charts. That's just the way the streaming laws work today. It's the same way, like I said, as watching a YouTube video. You can click play right when my video drops and I'll get one view on that video. You can go on Drake's album and click play, and whatever song you click play on will get one stream. And this one loophole, if you will, has led Drake to break astounding amounts of records. It's extremely apparent when we look at all of his hits after 2018. Tootsie Slide, What's Next, Way Too Sexy, Wait For You, Jimmy Cooks, Slime You Out, First Person Shooter, and now with the release of Iceman, you also have Janice STFU. Out of all these songs, can you tell me, let alone standing toe-to-toe against Michael Jackson, can any of these songs hold a candle to even Drake's older hits? Like, this man's got 8 hits, 8 #1 hits in the 2020s decade. Besides maybe Wait For You with Thames and Future, have any of them had any real lasting impact? I like Jimmy Cooks, it was a cool song. I don't necessarily revisit it 4 years later. Same thing with First Person Shooter. And the numbers show it, right? Because like I mentioned before, in this streaming economy, everyone is going to rush to the album to go check it out on that first week. That's when the attention is at an all-time high. Think about it when like your favorite YouTuber drops a video, aka me, Rapaholics, you'll get the most amount of views in the first few hours of the video's drop. It's the same thing with an album. All of these hits that Drake had, these number one hits in the 2020s decade, yeah, they made a splash in that first week. That's when all of them hit number one. But I'm 99% sure, aside from, again, Wait For You with Thames and Future, none of these songs stayed at number one on the Billboard charts for more than 1 week, which speaks to the actual impact of these songs. So I go back to my original question. Did Drake beat the industry, or did he just figure out how to play the industry? So yeah, guys, look, my point is proven here exactly. If you look at Drake's older hits, stuff like God's Plan, Nice For What, In My Feelings, One Dance, all of these songs spent at least 8 weeks at the number one position on the Billboard charts. These were real certified hits, whether you like them or not. But once you get to the 2020s decade, where Drake had the most majority of his number one Billboard charting hits, none of them stayed at the top of the charts for more than 1 week. It's actually insane to see. Everything from Tootsie Slide to First Person Shooter, 8 different records, only spent 1 week each on the charts. So yeah, it's impressive that Drake racked up all these number one hits, but were any of these songs even actual hits? You'll get your answer when you look deeper into more records that Drake broke. So look at this, you guys. Back in 2021, when he dropped Certified Lover Boy, Drake occupied 9 out of the 10 spots on the Billboard charts that week. That is impressive no matter how you spin it, right? Even if none of these songs ended up becoming actual hits, his fan base was so undeniable that they ended up streaming his music so much on that first week that 9 songs from the album occupied almost the entirety of the top 10 on the Billboard charts. And he did the same thing with Iceman this time around. I think him and Taylor Swift are the only 2 artists to ever do this twice. But then let's analyze the longevity that these Iceman songs are going to have. We just saw that 9 out of the 10 spots on this week's chart are occupied by Iceman records. It makes sense. Iceman just dropped. It's still impressive, but it speaks more to the fact that there was very high interest for this album rather than it answering the question of, does Drake still have the hit-making capabilities he had 10 years ago? Or did he peak artistically? Because when you look at the second week numbers, right, like the drop off of how many people tuned out after that first big week, like how many people are really sticking around actually still dissecting, listening to the music, enjoying the music, bumping it. Well, there was 9 out of the 10 slots of the top 10 occupied by Drake songs in week 1. By week 2, it's predicted that he'll only have 2 songs left in there, and none of them at number 1. But let's really dig further into the longevity that this album had, because again, there's no doubt it made a massive splash on the charts, especially the first day that it dropped. There's no doubt Drake had an amazing rollout and did a great job rallying the fans to be engaged in this comeback. There's no doubt that he made a splash on the chart and broke a lot of records. But there's also no doubt that there seems to be a significant dip from the peak interest that Drake had on those first few days that Iceman dropped versus where we're at now. A dip that is a lot heavier than he historically may ever had.
Spicy.
What do I mean by that? Well, shout out to the creator Kevin Kenny. He's about to take us through an insane rabbit hole on the number side of things when it comes to Drake's Iceman, and even compares it to Kendrick's performance on GNX, which is a project that will come up several times later in this video because the dust has officially settled, right? The entire big 3, after breaking apart, have now each put out their own individual projects, reflecting on the beef, closing out that previous chapter, declaring their greatness and their desire to remain in that number 1 position. And so we gotta dissect who seems to truly be most likely to lead it. This is how Drake's been leading things on the charts.
How come nobody's talking about the real story of what's going on right now with Iceman? Drake is projected to go number 1, number 2, and number 3 on the album chart next week, and will also debut at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. But was this album a success? Did Drake win the beef? No matter how you feel, these numbers I'm about to show you in this video might change your mind. Did you know Iceman actually helped Kendrick this week? Spotify got caught lying trying to help Drake? Let me explain. Drake spent $15 million freezing the CN Tower last week. 75 different projectors costing $200,000 each. At its peak, Iceman episode 4 had 500,000 people watching. Then the album drops. 250 million Spotify streams on day one. 140 million streams for Iceman alone. Iceman is projected to do 520,000 units its first week. Maid of Honor is projected to do 135,000. Habibi 130,000. Drake's song Make Them Cry was reported to have 13.2 million global streams on its first day. The biggest streaming day ever for a hip hop song. Surpassing Not Like Us. This is where things went south. The next day, Spotify took that stat back. Publicly apologized, admitting they combined two different Drake songs to make up that 13.2 million. And in fact, Not Like Us was still the most streamed rap song in a single day of all time. But it gets worse. Drake's Make Them Cry sees a 63% drop off in streams on day two. The biggest single day fall off in history. But it's not just the song. All three of Drake's new albums see a 50+% drop off in streams in day two. CLB in 2021 took nearly a week to see this level of drop off. Also, if you know somebody who loves Drake or hates Drake, send them this video right now and I want to see what they think about all this. Remember all those projections? They all got downgraded. 520K became 475K, while 135 became 120, 130 became 115. But this next stat might shock you. Iceman sold just 11,500 pure albums. Maid of Honor and Habibi sold just 6,000 each. And before you come at me saying nobody buys albums anymore, GNX about 18 months ago sold 33,000 its first week. 3 times the pure sales of Iceman. And GNX didn't have a $15 million national monument involved. If you remember, it was a surprise drop. It also didn't have 43 tracks. It had 12. And speaking of Kendrick, Drake actually helped him this week. His GNX is back in the Apple Music top 10. But here's the key difference between these two albums. GNX grew in its first week, while Iceman is seemingly melting. On GNX's second day of streams, Squabble Up rose to a new peak of number 3 on the global charts. Not Like Us was a 3-week Billboard number 1. And Luther off this album was a 13-week Billboard number 1. While Drake faces a very tough road trying to stay at number 1 past his first week, with Olivia Rodrigo dropping the following Friday. What do you say after hearing all that? With 3 new albums, has Drake finally won the war? Or is Kendrick still king?
But it gets even worse, alright? Because we know the OV hoes were not going out without a fight. They were going to make sure Drake beat Jay-Z's record of most number 1 albums on the charts and beat Michael's record of most number 1 songs on the charts. And how did they do that? Well, they assembled their strongest meat munchers onto Twitter, strapped up in their fuzziest owl pajamas, hosted a public meeting where they planned restless nights of endless streaming for these 40 plus new Drake songs. Yes, they were just gonna leave these albums on repeat like a bot would do, right? Like a fake stream would do, over and over again, just to rack the numbers up. You don't believe me? Just watch.
What is this? Keep buying, keep streaming. Playlist in the comments if you need one. Also, if you bought the songs off iTunes, if you have to remove them from your download so your stream can count. You see the play though, right? The fuck what are you talking about?
Can breathe comfortably, knowing that we got the.
Come on, bro. Come on, man.
The number 1 album and the number 1 song. We want to make sure we're streaming consistently, morning, noon, and night, as often as you can. I don't give a fuck what nobody say on this internet, bro. I don't give a fuck if they say those.
Bro, imagine doing this for the biggest rapper in the world. Like, come on, bro. You know how insecure that is?
Bro, Drake stands in a Twitter space, strategizing on ways to help boost his streaming numbers so that he could go number 1. They seem to care more about Drake's numbers.
So once again, FD Signifier was right. It's gonna mean less to them if he's not number 1. Now I don't know if they're gonna not listen to him no more though. I still won't go that far and be like, yeah, they're gonna switch out to being Kendrick Lamar fans or no shit like that. I still believe that's a gigantic fucking step, but it means a little too much. Just the thought that their artist of choice is being streamed number 1 or whatever the case is. It shouldn't mean shit, but it does.
Drake literally just set the record for the biggest drop off of a number 1 song on the Spotify global chart.
That wasn't even real.
And this right here is just proof that Drake's music isn't resonating with the general public as much as it used to.
Why you staring at me like that? This dude bald as hell. Why are niggas calling his head uneven? You really never know if you looking into the eyes of a killer. You know that, right? Niggas be wearing a smile the whole time they holding a knife. Shit's crazy.
Now listen, all these sleepless nights of streaming the album endlessly, it might have paid off for the OV hoes because Drake had a pretty big first week. You can see that the Iceman album itself has the 4th highest first week sales week for a hip hop album in the 2020s decade. Now it's not nearly as big as Drake's old first week sales, stuff like Take Care, Certified Lover Boy, Scorpion, Views, Even More Life. All of these albums had sold well above 500,000 copies in the first week, but this is an improvement from where Drake was at literally right before the beef happened, when people were saying he was at his lowest in terms of creative output. Albums like For All the Dogs, Her Loss, they sold about 15% less than Iceman with around 400,000 in the first week. And this is important because, people questioning whether or not Drake fell off, numbers-wise, I think it's a pretty good indicator that not much has changed. And I hear people saying, oh, he barely sold physicals, it was all from the streams, it's gotta be the bots. I'm not going to speculate here, all right? I think there's enough that we can piece apart that we don't need to go into conspiracy land like the OVHOs do. And Drake's albums usually have very high stream counts, so I'm not going to go down the whole bot rabbit hole. I think that whole conversation is honestly killing music discourse right now because it's like, okay, I think everyone uses bots. So Drake might, but at the same time, then Kendrick also might. If we have no proof that anyone has used bots, then let's just stop this conversation and focus on what we actually see at face value. And what we can also see by this list is that Drake
Studies
bot
for a living.
Drake's Iceman album has outsold GNX's first week. GNX sold 319,000 first week. Drake's Iceman sold 460,000. Now, keep in mind, Iceman is 18 tracks. It's a whole 50% bigger than GNX. And we know the more songs, the more streams equals the more sales. But I want to point to something even more interesting, you guys, because this conversation is about longevity, right? Like, Kendrick won the battle, but who's winning the war? Who has the people? It's going to take a lot more than a first week sales number to show that. And of course, like I mentioned before, attention for Drake's next move was at an all-time high right when he dropped Iceman. So it made sense that the numbers were sky high when it first released. But how did it perform relative to Kendrick's GNX as the days progressed, as people had more time to actually sit with the music? Well, let's unpack it.
Can Kendrick Lamar compete with Drake numbers-wise? You feel me? Now, y'all know numbers are not the end-all, be-all to me, but I do like looking at numbers for data and measurements of reach, right? Now, if you don't know, there's currently rumors that Kendrick Lamar is on the way soon, and on the way could mean a week away, a month away, 3 months away, 6 years away. Who fucking knows, right? But we just got this tweet from Beatz who said, "Let's get it," and I like that tweet immediately. Beatz is the producer of the song we keep calling Tiramisu. The teaser song for GNX that wasn't actually on GNX and stuff like that. Beatz is the producer of that song, so people are like, yo, Kendrick really is on the way.
I hate to break it to you guys, I don't think we're ever getting that Tiramisu song. I think that's gonna probably be left in the GNX era, and I think it's great for what it was. He performed it at the Super Bowl. It was the first song we actually heard from the GNX era. Well, I guess technically Squabble Up was previewed in the Not Like Us music video, but regardless, as far as new Kendrick music on the way, I wouldn't be surprised if we get something by the end of this year. Huh? I don't think Kendrick is letting 2026 go, letting this moment that Drake has had go without making a statement of his own. But unlike Drake, I do not think that Kendrick will be spending a large percentage of his next release discussing a beef that happened 2 years ago. I think he'll actually make an active effort to disassociate from all those events, completely reinvent himself and build a new world around whatever's going on in his life now, because Kendrick is an artist first, right? And I think as an artist, you gotta realize, like, if this becomes a whole ping pong back and forth where like Drake just dissed Kendrick on Iceman, so Kendrick's got to fire back with Drake disses on Fireman, and then Drake comes back with a new album called Tsunami Man where he's firing at Kendrick, and then Kendrick drops a new album called Earthman where he's dissing Drake again, and then this whole battle keeps prolonging itself to 2038. Nah, I think once the hype of this Iceman era dies down, once it's like approaching 2027, people are going to be questioning where's Kendrick Lamar, and I think that's when he's going to pop out and show people with a whole new style.
Now, before I dive into this, I want to point a few things out, right? I want to air these things out before we even get to talking about it. For one, Kendrick Lamar's GNX released with only 7 hours of tracking on opening day, right? We can clarify that. We can get that out of the way. Secondly, Drake did drop 3 albums at once, right? So the other 2 albums might have taken some streams away from what would have went towards Iceman. We can get that out of the way, right? Thirdly, Iceman is going to sell more than GNX. That is not disputed or an argument. Let's get that out of the way. Fourth, Iceman released in 2026. In January of 2026, Spotify or Billboard changed the way they count streams for the Billboard chart. So streams now count for more than they used to when GNX released. We got all of those things out of the way, right? Now, y'all know that clip that I keep playing where I said that I think Drake is a 500,000 first week artist. You feel me? In that same video, I was disagreeing with Akademiks because Akademiks was framing it as Kendrick Lamar is a 300,000 first week artist. And people were agreeing because if you look at Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers and GNX, it looks like Kendrick Lamar is a 300,000 first week artist.
It's funny because now Akademiks is so compromised. He's saying Kendrick is not a 300,000 first week artist. He's saying Kendrick is a 200,000 first week artist. But we'll get to Akademiks shortly because any ounce of credibility that he had is now out the window when it comes to Drake. Now, when it comes to Drake, drop a comment if you got that reference. Spicy. I don't think you guys realize, like, if Kendrick Lamar wanted to have a massive first week, if that was what was important to him, he would do it. He's done it in the past. Look at albums like Damn. Damn had all the physicals shipped out in the first week. Why is that important? Because if you can get your vinyls delivered to customers, to fans in that first week, then those physical sales count towards your first week number. And in Damn's case, that contributed to like 300,000 in CD and physical sales alone. Plus, he went for the blockbuster hits on that album, right? Humble, DNA, Love, Loyalty with Rihanna. Like, these were massive hits. And because of that, the album reached a massive global audience. So the whole first week sales numbers for Damn were like 600,000. He actually beat out Drake that year, and funny enough, Drake had left an Instagram comment right when Damn had released, congratulating Kendrick, saying like, amazing to see all of our music moving. But I don't think Kendrick was too moved by that. Back to, this whole first week sales conversation, right? Because again, when we're talking impact, when we're talking legacy, yeah, numbers are a small puzzle piece to a much greater picture. But when you're talking about the scope of who Drake has been, what his identity has been to hip hop, to music as a whole, right? Numbers are a massive element of that. And in order to show the world, hey, I was not destroyed by this battle, I can still come out and fight the record labels, fight these massive rappers and still be on top, you got to prove that in a sense with the numbers as well. And Drake sort of did, but how does that actually compare to what Kendrick has been doing, right? Because Kendrick no doubt won the battle in 2024, but the war for the crown, for who will be that top guy, that's still an ongoing thing.
But let's look at the streaming numbers, right? Let's compare GNX and Iceman. Now, again, the first day, Kendrick had 7 hours of tracking. Drake had a full day. He cooked him by like 100 million streams. But then every day after that, we're looking at filtered streams. They're the same. Like, they're relatively the same on streaming from days 2 through 7. You feel me? And note, GNX did have physicals, but none of those physicals shipped during the first week. All of the physicals shipped during the Super Bowl week. So physicals do not count towards album sales until the day that they're shipped, not the day that they're purchased. So none of those physicals counted. So we're just looking at streaming numbers against each other, and they mirror each other. Kendrick edged him on most of the days, but they mirror each other. And I was telling people, Kendrick Lamar is at the peak of his popularity. So for Kendrick Lamar's next album, he was to announce his album date, not do a surprise release midway through a Friday and just tweet out a link and then that's it. But you see how Drake had the live stream that night. He had the 3 streams building up to it. He had the podcasters or the streamers like working for him, like Akademiks and XQC and Adin Ross all pushing it, and he had them featured on it and doing live stream, listen to it, and like actually had a rollout. And then for GNX, it was just a tweeted link, yet the numbers still mirror each other. I think a lot of people are like not understanding how big of an artist Kendrick Lamar has grown into from this. And I think he can surpass his damn peak where he sold 603,000 first week. Like if he was to announce his next album, do a rollout, drop it on a Friday, release physicals and ship all those out, we're going to see a rapper touch 600,000, something like that. Like I'm telling you guys, right? Because you guys are just going to look at the blanket number and say, oh, but he only did 326,000 in GNX. So how can you even say that? Let's look at the data, make it make sense with the context of everything around it. Again, Kendrick Lamar is Kendrick Lamar, so he's going to do whatever the fuck he wants. He'll drop this shit on a Wednesday and not give a fuck about numbers at all. Just for shits and giggles, I would like y'all to look at the data and tell me I'm crazy. That was where I was disagreeing with Akademiks, because he was making it seem like J. Cole and Kendrick are on the same level of fame, and that couldn't be further from the truth. I think Drake is the more popular celebrity guy, but I think right now, Kendrick Lamar, he out of here, gang.
Yes, you see, you got Drake mouthpieces that are doing their best to try and put Kendrick Lamar in the J. Cole bracket when it comes to numbers. That's calculated. They're doing that because they're scarred from 2025, when Kendrick spent like 12, 13 weeks at #1 on the charts with Luther, with GNX, outselling anything that Drake had put out. The 40 songs that Drake had put out in between The Battle and Iceman, Kendrick Lamar was outselling all that. And shout out to that creator. I just played you guys Trap Forever for breaking it down in a really concise way. How the numbers on Iceman and GNX, when you take out that first day when interest was at an all-time high to see what Drake's next move would be, actually digging into the longer-term numbers show that Kendrick actually had the edge on Drake on most of those days when it came to streams. So it kind of makes you wonder, what will Kendrick's next move look like? And will it change the dynamics of who's really at the top when it comes to numbers? Again, that's all if Kendrick Lamar cares to go after that mission, like we saw him do with Damn. Because in that year, undoubtedly, Kendrick Lamar beat Drake on the numbers side. When Kendrick cared about the numbers in 2024 by putting out a hit song as a diss song, putting out an album full of bangers with GNX, he beat Drake on that front as well. So will he beat Drake at his own game once again? Only time will tell. But beyond will Kendrick beat Drake, we also have to ask, did Drake beat the industry? Because we know, at least from his perspective, the whole lawsuit was related to him feeling like his label was trying to devalue his brand so they can offer him less when it comes time to actually renegotiate his contract. And all throughout Iceman, Drake is talking about being free, being better off as an independent artist. Of course, the main focal point of Drake dropping 3 albums all at once last week was related to the fact that it could have been an escape route from his current contract with UMG. If you drop 3 albums, maybe you fulfilled everything that the contract demands of you. Industry experts actually do believe that this was enough to fulfill Drake's contract. So this isn't just like random internet rumors or discussion. This is like real people who work within the industry who are saying it looks like Drake has fulfilled everything and is now a free man, can now get possibly one of the biggest contracts we've ever seen within music if he renegotiates with UMG, or maybe he decides to go independent and does something monumental that we've never seen an artist of his size do. Now, as far as his greatest glazer goes, DJ Big Mac Akademiks, he believes that Drake is already in discussion with record labels for a $1 billion contract. He thinks that UMG and Drake's lawsuit will get settled, and Drake may even sign back to UMG for $1 billion.
And I didn't, this went over my head. That's why I'm glad for this guy. He caught it. We're going to hear that Drake signs. Remember, I told you this. He signs a high 9-figure or a 10-figure deal, 10-figure meaning $1 billion. And all their issues are going to resolve amicably. They're going to put out a statement saying Drake is a really good artist, a valuable asset, someone who they, have published and promoted over a dozen LPs, and that they value the relationship and they're excited for it to continue into the foreseeable future. This is why I know people look at the lawsuit and, the stupid niggas are going to say Kendrick. The slightly smarter niggas are going to say, well, no, he's trying to beat the label, but how could you really beat the label?
But that's not the only big number that DJ Big Mac Akademiks was talking about in relation to Drake, because he also may have had a Freudian slip and admitted that Drake has not one, but multiple different children, like Kendrick was inferring to on Meet the Grams.
They have tried to. Now, I'm pretty sure they can't get by the embassy to take pictures of Drake's kids, but I'm pretty sure they can't get by the embassy to take pictures of Drake's kids, but I'm telling you, the embassy to take pictures of Drake's kids, but I'm telling you, that's where it's at. So I want to pick y'all brain. Who y'all think is doing this?
Now, honestly, I would say going forward, take everything that this very large man says with a grain of salt, because ever since Drake flew him out to Toronto, took him on a date, and gave him an owl chain, this man went 100% complete compromise mode. There is nothing he says at this point when it comes to Drake, Kendrick Lamar, or whatever that has an ounce of objectivity. It is straight Canadian bacon burping and sausage sucking.
This Akademiks saying that he was offered either $1 million or to have dinner with Drake. He chose the dinner.
Oh, wow. It's the one thing money can't buy, even though money bought it. I have my
Wasn't this your friend? Yeah, I mean, kind of consider Akademiks. He's like a content friend.
Oh, it is. It is.
It's not real, is it? It's legit? For me?
Yeah. Overdue. No. Been rapping a long time.
He got taken on a date. This is a date, bro. You should have taken the $1 million. And if you care about black issues first, you should have taken that $1 million and donated it to BLM. But he wanted to go on a date with Drake. This is incredible. Right after he's saying that, like, yeah, he would drive down the street and every light would turn green when Drake showed up. Someone said Drake cracked. Like, this is how you take a bitch out. This is, dude.
And don't get me wrong, you guys, I hate Sneeko, but even a broken clock is right twice a day. And yes, Akademiks completely put belt to butt against Sneeko when it came to the whole Chud the Builder discussion. And that's why Sneeko here is saying, like, if Akademiks cares so much about black issues, he should have taken the $1 million instead of the Drake chain and donated it to BLM. He's making fun of Akademiks here, but that whole discussion about Chud the Builder, that's a topic for another video. And as dumb as Sneeko is, he's actually kind of correct here, right? Like, this was a date, objectively speaking. Drake flew Akademiks to a restaurant, brought him a gift, and now Akademiks feels obligated to never say anything negative about Drake again.
Those 3 Big Macs are for me.
Sneeko even asked him, right? Because Akademiks was spitting facts when it came to Sneeko's warped perception of freedom of speech and how it tied back to Chud the Builder and racism. But Sneeko was like, okay, well, what do you actually stand for, right? You don't stand for any social issues. What do you stand for, Drake? Anyways, it's a convo for another video. But if you want further proof that this owl chain that Drake gifted Akademiks has only made the Big Mac Bandit more compromised, check out this.
My nigga, like if you telling me, so you telling me Kendrick didn't win that battle? That what you saying?
I'm gonna be honest with you. I think that battle's up in the air. I'm looking at the wall.
Hey, bro, listen.
I know who. All right, Kendrick got the biggest song. Kendrick got the biggest song in that battle,
bro.
Kendrick got the biggest song in the battle.
Look, he put an owl around your neck, not a leash.
Yo,
this do that, bro.
Why goes
everybody, bro? None of your chat agrees with you.
Now, the battle obviously can't be rewritten, right? And judging by the subject matter in Iceman, I think even Drake knows that and accepted it. The only ones trying to rewrite history are his delusional fans. But one thing we know in the present moment is that currently, the entire Big Three have all released albums either reflecting on this beef or moving past it. Kendrick with GNX, J. Cole with The Fall Off, and now Drake with, his 3 bloated projects. And I think the Company Man and Stat Quo on their new podcast, The Third Verse, they had an interesting discussion around the longevity behind each of these projects, who kind of came out with the strongest body of work after the battle. And I think it's an interesting discussion to be had that ties into the bigger conversation of who won the war. We know who won the battle, but how does the Big Three's legacy change from here? It's all contingent on the music they drop. Stat Quo made an interesting point in that the battle had forced all 3 of them to actually deviate from their normal processes and create something that in one way or another is left field or out of the box.
They all stepped outside of themselves in some kind of a way. Kendrick made a complete West Coast album, which I don't think he would have done that. That was oriented towards club music and stuff that people play at the clubs. I don't think he would have done that with pre-battle. None of his projects felt like this, right? J. Cole was the closest to himself, but still, I think he would have tried to make more music that was palatable to the masses had he didn't experience this situation. He went so completely into a comfort zone of making something that was so like, okay, well, they won't be mad at me for this. This is what I'm gonna be. He played it so safe because of what he had experienced with the battle. And I think in Drake's situation, I think this project would have been totally different. I don't think he would have put out 3 albums because it wouldn't be a lawsuit, right? And I think it would have been a lot better because some of the people that he might have lost some trust with probably was not there to guide him through it. You can see, I can hear the differences in in the music. And I think that's come from a place of distrust, which he wouldn't have experienced if this battle never happened. So it affected all three of them in a different type of a way. Negative, positive, whatever you deem it to be.
With what he says about Drake, I actually kind of disagree. I'm on the same page in terms of I think Iceman would sound vastly different if the whole Kendrick battle never happened. And I think it actually forced Drake to slightly improve his pen and his writing in a certain regard. Because if you look back at albums like For All the Dogs, he sounded half asleep on there. On Iceman, at least, he feels like he has a reason to rap. Now, how will it age? It's kind of tough to say, because I think the biggest factor that changed the direction of this album related to the beef was the fact that Drake spends 90% of the more lyrical focused songs just talking about the beef. So can you go back and revisit a lot of these tracks in 10 years from now when the moment has drastically passed? Like, unless you're an extreme Drake stan who's, you know, invested into every aspect of his life, are you really going to care about him rapping about his grievances against DJ Khaled or LeBron James or Kendrick?
I study
Kendrick Lamar
for a living.
To me, that's one of the greater pitfalls of Iceman as an album, is the subject matter is very focused on one particular issue. I wish he expanded on some of the concepts that he touched on the intro, like, you know, his problems or his fears of aging, his family issues, even his battle with the record label and his fight for, you know, his version of independence. Like, I would have loved to see him expand on those issues more than, you know, just harp on his ops and the beef. I think for that reason, Iceman will have a hard time being a timeless album because the subject matter is so stuck in a particular moment. But as far as, like, you know, people not being around him that could help him with the quality control of the project, I actually disagree there. I think this album is a step up from the last couple of Drake albums from a production perspective, and even a lot of the times from a writing perspective. I think, yeah, there's repetitive flows and, you know, one-dimensional subject matter just centered around the beef, but there's clever wordplay scattered around it. I think that he has some of the best hooks that he's written in years on this project. I think he challenges himself the most lyrically and with the production he chooses on this album compared to what we've seen in the last 4 or 5 years. And I think that all of that only happened because of the creative redemption he felt he needed to make after the loss he took to Kendrick in that battle.
I know I'm probably gonna get some flack for this. I don't think any of the albums that came out off of this were good. I think they were all subpar. I'm only comparing the albums to other albums that they put out in their catalog. So when I listen to Bully or Donda, I can't call it a great album because that would mean that I think it's as good as Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy or College Dropout or, you know, Graduation. You know what I mean? These guys are past their primes, and I don't foresee any of them making music as good as what they've already done. I didn't think Dangerous was as good as Off the Wall or Thriller. It was past Mike's prime. Dangerous was a good album, still had some hits on it, but nowhere near Off the Wall or Thriller.
It's interesting hearing you describe GNX as not great when it has so many hits on it, and you're a hits guy.
But at the same time, that's not what I fell in love with him for. I like the balance, gotcha. And Damn gave me that. Damn had 4 records, but the rest of that shit was very introspective. It was very story-oriented, and I didn't particularly love the hits on GNX. But I understand it was appropriate for what he was going through. He made the perfect album for what he was dealing with. Drake would challenge him like, you can't make certain type of songs. You can't. He said, oh, I can't? I'm gonna give you a whole album of bops. I'm gonna be in the club out here in LA on the West Coast for 2 years. You gotta hear me. Turn your TV off. That's not what I fell in love with. There's no all right on GNX. Don't Kill My Vibe, and these, like, this is the Kendrick that I think that's him at his apex. Everything else that is still good and better than everybody else that does it. I'm only comparing him to him. I'm not comparing them to each other. But if I had to rank them, I would put GNX first, Iceman second. I'm not counting that other stuff. If we count that other stuff he got going on, that experimental where you taking everybody else's flows and doing all kinds of weird shit, talking about I'm too sexy for my draws, all that stuff, that's cool. I'm not counting that, but I would put Iceman second, and then I'll put the J. Cole project third. As far as if we ranking these 3, in my opinion.
Trying to rate these projects for me is a little bit conflicting because on the one end, I actually personally think J. Cole had the most advanced rapping on the fall off compared to both Iceman and GNX. His storytelling, the challenges he took, like that entire song where he's just telling his entire life story backwards. The final verse on the intro to the second disc, 39 intro. The flow that J. Cole catches on that song mixed with like just the sheer way he's piecing rhymes together is one of the top lyrical performances I think we've ever seen from J. Cole throughout his career. And narratively, you know, the whole first disc tells a story from song to song, which is incredibly hard to continue that progressive pacing for like 11 different tracks back to back, right? I think Cole's mission for that album was to challenge himself lyrically, to not necessarily step out of his zone production wise or even subject matter wise necessarily, but to just be the best version of J. Cole lyrically that he could be. And I do think he accomplished that with The Fall Off. Now, as far as an album overall, replay value, of course, is a huge factor, and I don't think we got that from The Fall Off as much as I personally have gotten that from GNX, and how I think even Iceman will live on the charts compared to J. Cole's work. When focusing on GNX, I mean, my personal 3 favorite songs right now that I keep going back to from that project are Hey Now, Gloria, and Whacked Out Murals. And just based off the versatility of those 3 songs alone, it speaks to how diverse that track list is and how there's really a song for everybody on there. And I think that's why tracks like Luther, tracks like TV Off went on to be massive hits. But like Stat was saying, if you're a fan of the Sing About Me I'm Dying of Thirst Kendrick, or the Lust Kendrick, the storytelling Kendrick, right? Then you have tracks like Reincarnated, Gloria, The Hard Part 6.
I study
Kendrick Lamar
for a living.
Then if we want to look at the positives of Iceman, I think there's some amazing production on there. Songs like Make Them Pay, that might be one of Drake's best songs of all time, potentially. And Drake's, lyrical performance really gets enhanced by that cloudy, dreamlike production that Overcast did on that song. Phenomenal track. You even get a little taste of the If You're Reading This It's Too Late days on the production side with songs like Whisper My Name, Plot Twist, National Treasure. Like those feel like those classic hard-hitting Boy Wonder trap beats. You get an ode back to Tuscan Leather. The intro off Nothing Was the Same with the intro off this album, Make Them Cry, with the 3 or 4 beat switches in there. The chop vocals in the middle of the song where he starts going like, it's just me alone this time, no features. It almost sounds like that beat is very reminiscent to Jay-Z's song Cry. And it's ironic because Drake titled this track Make Them Cry. Then you got, the typical Drake trying to dabble into the more younger generation soundscape, right? With all the rage influence on tracks like Dust, Ran to Atlanta, Janice, STFU. And while the subject matter again feels trapped in a moment of time, it feels like a lot of victim raps from Drake, I do think he pushed himself to rap at a higher level than he has been in a while, and I also respect him for doing it relatively alone, right? We didn't really have too many features on this project. It was really Drake holding his own weight. So there's a lot that's actually pretty decent about this release as well. Now, I do agree again with Stat that I think all 3 of them might be past their prime just because of the heights that we've gotten from all of them, right? Like a 2014 Forest Hills Drive, Good Kid, Mad City, To Pimp a Butterfly, Take Care, Nothing Was the Same. Like, these are projects that would be very hard for anyone to achieve, let alone witnessing the creators of these projects recreate something like this. They were telling stories that had been built up throughout their, 25, 30 years of living by the time they created those projects. Now they're almost all 40. Rich, successful, sometimes in J. Cole's position, comfortable. Spicy. And that could lead to, a little bit less of a spark in the pen or less intriguing or relatable subject matter. But one thing's for sure is I think that beef reignited all 3 of them. And with all 3 of them getting what they needed to off their chest related to the massive civil war of 2024, the dust has essentially settled. So it'll be interesting to see who caps this marathon off with the gold medal. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you in the next one.
I study rap
Rapaholics
for a living.